My 5-year-old son's actions were incredibly brave, yet my mother and sister still called the police to have him taken away. I came home early from a business trip, expecting to see my son playing happily. Instead, he was standing there, trembling in front of two towering police officers. And my son, just like any child in that moment, was terrified because his grandmother had told him that these strange men would take him away. They thought I would let it slide, like I had in the past. But no. If you dare lay a hand on my child, you will pay dearly for it, even if you are my own blood. I am Madison, 32 years old, living in the northern suburbs of Denver with my young son, Oliver. People often say I am strong, independent, resilient, but few know that to have a small 3-bedroom house, a stable job in the fintech sector, and a peaceful smile every night beside my child, I have gone through many years without any help from my own family. Since I was young, I learned how to stand on my own feet. My mother, Samantha, she always treated my younger sister, Lisa, as the princess of the family, while I was more like a utility. I never had new dresses for Christmas, never got driven to school in a private car, and certainly never had anyone sit beside me to help with a difficult math problem at night. While I quietly saved every scholarship dollar, took a job at the school library to cover my living expenses and tuition, Lisa was gifted expensive dresses by my mother and even a brand new car simply because she got into a not-so-renowned university in the neighboring state. I wasn't jealous. I simply learned to accept. That was the only thing I could do to survive in that house. In my senior year of college, I met James, the first man who saw me not as someone tough and unbreakable, but as a girl who was vulnerable and worthy of love. We met at a student-organized event handing out blankets and food to the homeless. He helped me carry heavy boxes, told little stories that made me laugh until my stomach hurt. James had a gentle smile and eyes that made me feel heard. We dated, graduated, then married just 2 years later in a small, warm ceremony with a few close friends and former professors. At the church wedding, as James and I were reciting our vows, the back door suddenly opened. My mother and Lisa walked in, nearly 30 minutes late. I still remember vividly my mother's scrutinizing gaze, her beige dress wrinkled from rushing, and Lisa whispering, "Told you we should have waited until we finished." They sat for less than 10 minutes and left right after the pastor pronounced us husband and wife, saying, "I have to help Lisa prepare for her important interview tomorrow morning." I watched them walk out, saying nothing. No blame, no tears, just a silent confirmation that I was never a priority in their world. But James made me believe I was building a new family, one with kindness, laughter, and without the cold silence of the past. When I found out I was pregnant, James cried. He said this child was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And I believed it. Oliver was born on an early spring morning, with messy brown hair and eyes just like his father's. But life is not always fair. When Oliver was 10 months old, James was hit by a drunk driver's car while driving to work the night shift. He died instantly at the scene. I screamed in the cold, sterile hospital room, clutching the blanket he always used, begging for something that could not be undone. At James's funeral, my mother was nowhere to be seen. I sent a message to tell her, but only received a reply. "My condolences. I'm busy taking care of Lisa." I didn't cry anymore. Not because I was strong, but because my tears had long run dry. I began life as a single mother before I even turned 28, with a child who couldn't yet speak, and a wound that hadn't had time to scar. But I didn't give up. I went back to work only 6 weeks after James's death. I brought Oliver with me on long work days, laying him to sleep in the company break room, asking my boss to let me work remotely whenever possible. I no longer had the time to dwell on unfairness or on what I had lost, because Oliver was all I had left. And I vowed to give my son a life unlike mine. A life full, kind, and loved without condition. I started my life over in silence, with no ceremony, no congratulations, no one to lean on but myself. At that time, Oliver still couldn't clearly say the word mom. I had just returned to my job at the fintech company, where I'd worked for the past 3 years, while learning to be a mother, a father, and everything in between. Those first months were truly brutal. There were nights I sat in the dark, next to his little crib, listening to his sobbing cries, unable to cry along, afraid he might see his mother weak. I used my financial analysis skills to optimize our household budget like it was a survival project. I cut every non-essential expense, took advantage of every cashback program, and every night after he fell asleep, I worked on freelance projects to increase income. Every penny was calculated like gold, and step by step, I began to see the first faint glimmers of light at the end of the tunnel. A year after James died, I was nominated to join the company's ERP system transition project team. I spent weeks writing a proposal to improve the invoice processing workflow, an idea that saved the company hundreds of man-hours every quarter. My boss, a woman in her 50s named Diane, quietly placed her hand on my shoulder after my presentation and said, "James would be so proud." That was the first time I cried at the office. Not out of weakness, but because I felt recognized, something I had never experienced growing up. After a few successful projects, I was promoted, and that came with a salary increase. I used most of that money to pay off the remaining student loans and began saving for a goal I once thought impossible: buying a home. Late last year, when Oliver had just turned 5, I signed the papers for a small 3-bedroom house in the northern suburbs of Denver, with a garden big enough to grow tomatoes and white chrysanthemums, James's favorite flowers. I moved in with my own hands, hammering every nail, assembling every shelf. Oliver had his own room, with a window looking out at a red maple tree, and a small sign on the door that read, "Oliver's Castle." I never thought I would touch the feeling of calling a place home, but in that moment, when the two of us fell asleep in the living room holding each other, I believed we were truly home. I still remember that night vividly, a sweltering July night when I was sitting with Oliver on the sofa, rereading his favorite story about a blue dragon. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. What surprised me was not that she called, but the sound of her voice. Shaky. Off rhythm. "Madison, my house burned down. Everything's gone. Nothing left." I sat upright, gripping the phone, listening to her sobs choking through the line. For a moment, all the old memories, her coldness, the unfair times she defended Lisa, faded to the back. All I heard was a mother in panic in the middle of the night with no home. I spoke immediately, without hesitation. "You and Lisa, come here. I have a room. Stay until you get the insurance money and buy another house." I had a 3-bedroom home, which meant, in reality, only one extra room, since Oliver and I each had our own. That very night, I moved some things out of the large entry hall, set up an extra foldable bed, and my mother and Lisa moved in. They brought a few suitcases of clothes that had survived, their eyes still heavy with sorrow. I hugged them, a real hug, without judgment. Oliver was a bit confused at first, but soon became excited to have more family around. The next morning, I took their smoke-stained bedding and clothes to the laundromat, hoping to salvage what could still be used, and I picked up a few curtains to give them some privacy. That afternoon, I started scouring Facebook Marketplace, asking friends and neighbors for secondhand donations. Anything usable. A bedside lamp, a small shelf, a few outfits. I bought a new washer and dryer because the old ones couldn't handle laundry for 4 people. Both the scale and pace of my household doubled in a single late-night phone call. But I didn't complain. I did it all like a reflex. They were my mother, my sister, my family, even if the past had never been sweet. 2 days later, my home settled into a new rhythm. My mother and Lisa seemed more comfortable, enjoying sandwiches and sunny side-up eggs I made. Every day I cooked more, did more laundry, and worked extra hours to cover the new expenses. In the beginning, I thought, maybe this is our chance to start over. For my mother to see how much I've grown. For Lisa to understand that I have always been here when they needed me. I truly believed that. But only a few weeks later, that initial warmth began to be replaced by a slow, simmering exhaustion. My mother and Lisa started behaving as though this was their house, without a single question, without the slightest sign of awkwardness. Lisa left high heels scattered everywhere, spread makeup all over the breakfast table. My mother, out of habit, kept the air conditioner running all day, even in mid-July, then complained that the hot water from the shower wasn't strong enough. They never once asked about Oliver's daily routine, never offered to help with dinner or fold the laundry. I still woke up early, took my son to school, worked 8 hours, then came home to cook, clean, check his homework. While they sat watching TV or on the phone, grumbling about how the insurance is taking too long, or this place is too cramped to be comfortable. I tried to be patient. I bought more household items. From a new bedsheet set to a rice cooker to replace the one Lisa dropped and broke. But a question began to form in my mind. Am I supporting 2 more adults? Everything came to a head one evening when Lisa walked into my room, stood in the doorway, and said very softly, "Hey, I think you should consider investing just a small amount in me, about $3,000. I'm planning to start a skincare channel. It's trending. I might even make more than your salary." I looked at my sister, the one who had once been gifted a new car by our mother, who had been forgiven over and over for her reckless spending throughout college. And I just smiled, faintly. I can't. That answer made Lisa's face drop. She turned away without another word. After that day, the atmosphere in the house changed noticeably. My mother stopped asking about my work like she had in the early days. Lisa was unusually silent, speaking only to our mother while I became a shadow moving between 3 roles: mother, homeowner, and financial provider. I began to feel tired. Tired in a way no amount of sleep could cure. But I still told myself, hold on a little longer. When they get the insurance payout, they'll leave. Everything will be fine. I didn't yet know this was only the prelude to an even bigger upheaval, one that would force me to confront my entire definition of the word family. In the middle of a sudden 3-day business trip, while I was in a meeting with clients, I received a text from a neighbor. "Madison, there are quite a few cars parked outside your house this afternoon. Not sure what's going on, just thought you should know." My heart immediately sank. I quickly called home, but no one answered. The unease made me decide to change my ticket and come back early. The next morning, I stepped out of the taxi in front of my house, suitcase still in hand, and saw trash scattered across the porch and loud chatter coming from the living room. I walked in and froze. My home, the place I had tried to keep quiet and safe for my son, had turned into a party. Music blared. A strange woman was walking barefoot across the wooden floor, holding a glass of red wine. My mother, in pajamas, was chatting animatedly with 3 friends her age. Lisa was posing for selfies with her friends in the kitchen, snapping photos of sushi I had no idea who had ordered. I felt like an invisible guest in my own house, but what truly froze me was the sight of Oliver standing at the doorway, arms spread wide, blocking guests from coming in. His face was sullen, his eyes red. I heard him clearly, repeating over and over, "This is my mom's house. No one's allowed in when my mom's not home." One of my mother's friends, perhaps thinking he was being rude, tilted her chin and asked, "And who are you to tell me I can't come in?" I was about to step in when 2 police officers appeared in the front yard. I was stunned. "Police!" Oliver panicked, running to me and clinging to my leg as if it were the last life preserver. One of the officers nodded in greeting and asked, "Who called about a child not letting guests into the house?" I looked over, My mother stood there, calm as if she'd just called a flower delivery. I did. The boy was rude. He needs to be taught a lesson, she said. I turned away, forcing myself to stay composed. After I explained the entire situation, the officers sighed. One knelt down and spoke gently to Oliver. You did the right thing protecting your home. There's nothing wrong with that. Then he turned to my mother. This isn't serious enough to call the police. Next time, handle it privately. This is not an emergency. When they left, Oliver was still trembling, his face buried in my chest. I bent down and whispered, "You didn't do anything wrong." But inside me, something had changed. I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt a boundary had been trampled too far, and I knew it was time to do what I should have done a long time ago. When the door closed behind the two officers, I stood still in my own home, feeling like a stranger. The air in the room was thick, not from cigarette smoke or leftover food, but from the heavy silence after chaos. Oliver was still clinging to me, his eyes red, while my mother crossed her arms and shot me an irritated glance. Lisa kept her eyes glued to her phone, not bothering to look up. I walked over to the speakers and turned off the music. The noise vanished instantly, leaving an empty space that echoed inside me. Then I turned, not shouting, not angry, and said in a voice calm to the point of coldness, "Everyone, leave my house, right now." My mother jumped up. "What?" "Madison, what the hell are you saying? We just went through a fire, we lost our home. You're throwing your mother and sister out on the street over a small party?" Lisa cut in. "You're being selfish. I just wanted a little fun after everything that's happened. Why do you always make yourself the victim and everyone else the burden?" I took a deep breath. "This is not about a party. This is about you calling the police to my house, because a 5-year-old dared to do the right thing. This is about you both treating this place like your own, spending, rearranging, hosting, and insulting my child right in front of him." I looked down at Oliver, still holding my hand tightly, then looked up and concluded, "I have tried my best. I opened my arms when you needed help, but I owe no one anything anymore. And I will not allow anyone to hurt my child, not even blood relatives." My mother looked like she was about to say something, but I had already turned away, lifted Oliver into my arms, and walked straight to my room. In my mind, there was no more trembling, no more regret, only clarity. I texted my mother and Lisa, giving them 24 hours to leave my house. I didn't forbid them from going anywhere, but I would not let them stay another night. The next morning, I removed all the secondary account access I had set up for my mother to help with bills. I stopped paying off Lisa's remaining student loan, something I had been quietly covering for the past year. I canceled every shared financial connection. Every tie, material and emotional, I cut off. The following morning, when I woke up, they were gone. No thank you note. No apology. Only a broken glass in the sink and a lipstick stain on a sofa pillow. I cleaned up each small thing as if I were removing the last fragments of a lifelong illusion. That if I were kind enough, hard-working enough, sacrificial enough, I would be loved. I thought everything would end there, that once they left my house, they would fade quietly into the background like shadows that had once stepped into my life. But I had underestimated the resistance of those who refuse to accept boundaries. A week later, I was called in for a private meeting by the principal of Oliver's preschool. She seemed uneasy as she handed me a record of a phone call. 2 women had claimed to be Oliver's grandmother and aunt, reporting that I often left him home alone, that the boy frequently showed signs of being neglected, living without affection, and possibly under inappropriate pressure for his age. I read each line of the note, my heart pounding. Not from fear, but from shock. This was how they reacted to being refused? By planting doubts about my ability as a mother. I made it clear to the school that only two people were authorized to pick up Oliver, myself and my best friend, Rachel. I signed the updated authorization form, requesting a written note. Do not allow the grandmother or aunt to access the child without written consent from the mother. The principal understood and was sympathetic, but I knew the damage went beyond words on a page. 2 days later, I received an email from my company's HR department, short and to the point. There is some unofficial information about your personal life being circulated via anonymous internal emails. I opened the attachment and saw familiar wording. She has been emotionally unstable since her husband's death. Her child is often left unattended. This may affect her work performance. I could barely breathe for a few seconds. I knew these words. No one but my mother or Lisa could have written them. The phrasing wasn't outright vicious, but it was calculated to plant seeds of doubt. I stood up, closed my laptop, and called a lawyer I knew. It took me just an hour to gather the emails, proof of the calls to the school, and old text messages from Lisa with her thinly veiled threat. "You'll regret kicking us out like that." I filed for a temporary restraining order against both my mother and Lisa, prohibiting them from contacting me or my son at any personal or public location, including his school, my workplace, my home, or any public event bearing Oliver's name. After submitting the paperwork at the courthouse, I sat in my car and looked at myself in the rearview mirror, no longer the girl who waited for acceptance from others, but a mother protecting her only child from the most toxic things, even if they took the form of family. I didn't want to be someone seeking revenge, but I was no longer someone who endured. This wasn't a war. It was an awakening, once and for all. 2 weeks later, I received a cream-colored envelope with no sender name, only the address of my mother's old house, the one that had burned down. Inside was a single sheet of paper with messy handwriting. "If you think you can cut off blood ties and live in peace, you're wrong. Oliver will one day see what kind of person you are." No signature. But I didn't need one. I recognized Lisa's handwriting immediately. I wasn't angry. I wasn't afraid. I only felt a strange emptiness, as if everything that had once caused me pain, once made me crave recognition, no longer had any power over me. That evening, I wrote a short email to both my mother and Lisa, using the old address I had once used to send them pictures of Oliver, holiday greetings, and Christmas invitations that had never been answered. This time, I didn't wait for a reply. I wrote, "I am old enough to understand, not everyone born into the same family belongs together. I once thought that if I was kind enough, gave enough, endured enough, I would be loved. But the truth is, there are people who only come close when they need you, and who are willing to destroy you when you no longer serve them. I'm not angry anymore. I'm only sorry. Sorry that I once believed we were a family. Now, I choose to live differently. For my son, for myself, and for the peace I've spent too many years trying to find." I pressed send. Then I closed that old email account. A small act, but one that carried the weight of closing the last door to a toxic past. I changed my phone number, deleted all contacts, and for the first time in my life, felt no guilt for cutting ties. Some relationships cannot be saved, not because you didn't try hard enough, but because the other person never intended to repair them. One afternoon, when I picked Oliver up from school, he pointed to the sky where the sunset had painted the whole neighborhood orange and said, "Mom, today I'm not scared anymore." I turned to look at him and knew that I wasn't either. I was no longer afraid of being judged, of being unloved, of losing people who were once my blood. Because the only things worth keeping are safety, respect, and the unconditional love I now give to myself and my son. A year has passed since I ended my relationship with my mother and Lisa. A year without phone calls that made my heart clench. No more late-night messages implying obligations, debts, or duties of blood. The first year in my life that I truly understood what peace was. Not the quiet of resignation, but the stillness that comes from within, when you no longer carry the warped expectations of a family that never acknowledged you. My life with Oliver is now tidy, warm, and full of rhythm. In the morning, I wake early to make breakfast, prepare his small lunchbox, and take him to school, where every teacher knows exactly who is authorized to pick him up and who is not. After work, I collect him, and the two of us stop by the little bookstore at the corner or take a walk in the park. On weekends, we garden in the backyard, where Oliver tends to a bed of white chrysanthemums, his father's flowers, and whenever they bloom, he points and says, "Daddy James is smiling. Right, Mom?" I nod. Never do I feel James's presence more clearly than in our son's eyes. I've spent this past year not only healing my child, but also myself. I've met with a therapist, something I once thought was only for the weak. But I learned that healing isn't weakness. It is a quiet form of courage. I learned to recognize boundaries, to set limits, and to no longer shrink when faced with unfounded guilt. I started writing. Not to publish, but to listen to the voice inside me. Some nights I reread the first line I ever wrote. I once thought I didn't deserve to be loved unless I brought value to someone. And I cried. Not from sadness, but because I finally realized that had never been true. My 3-bedroom house is no longer a temporary shelter. Now it is a true home. Every wall, every bookshelf, every hanging towel carries the breath of the two of us. Two people who walked through pain and chose love as their direction in life. I don't need anyone out there to acknowledge me. I only need Oliver to look at me and say, "Thank you for being my mom." To me, that is everything. One early spring afternoon, I took Oliver to the birthday party of Rachel's son. Rachel being my best friend, and the one who had quietly stood by me through my lowest moments. Rachel's house wasn't big, but it was filled with laughter. Everyone there knew Oliver's name, knew he preferred chocolate cake to vanilla, and knew exactly how hard I had tried to be the best mother I could. An older woman, Rachel's mother, after playing with the children, came over, placed her hand on my shoulder, and said, "You are a wonderful mother. Rachel says you are stronger than anyone she's ever known. Our family is proud to have you here." I nodded in thanks, but inside, my throat tightened. On the way home, with Oliver asleep in the back seat, I sat behind the wheel, watching the streetlights blur against the windshield. Suddenly I realized I had just experienced a real family gathering. No one there shared my blood. But they knew my name, knew my pain, and chose to step into my life not out of gain, but out of empathy, out of human kindness. I once thought family was unchangeable, that it was the people who gave birth to you, raised you, and for some reason, you had to endure them for life. But I was wrong. Family is not blood. Family is the people who stay when you are broken. The ones with whom you don't have to be on guard, don't have to trade your self-respect to be loved. People who may not look like you, who didn't know you as a child, but who choose to care for you unconditionally. I rebuilt my definition of family from the smallest things. A hand-drawn card from Oliver reading, "Happy Best Worker Day, Mom." A weekend coffee with a former coworker who is now my nightly confidant, or Rachel's hug, when I received the court's official approval of the 3-year restraining order against my mother and Lisa. My family now is Oliver, the boy who once stood guard at the door to keep anyone out when his mother wasn't home. It is me, the woman who once thought she was only a shadow behind other people's priorities, now learning to stand tall and say, "No." And it is the people who don't share my blood, but share my values. Kindness, honesty, and enough grace to love me when I am not perfect. Maybe my mother and Lisa will never change. Maybe they will always see me as the traitorous daughter, but I no longer need their forgiveness or recognition, because I have given those things to myself, and that is enough. This June, I decided to take a week off work to take Oliver away. Not to Disneyland or some luxury resort people always suggest, but to a small town in Colorado Springs, with mountains, pine forests, and a crystal-clear lake nestled between two rocky slopes. I rented a simple wooden cabin with no internet, no TV, just candles, books, and the sound of a child's laughter. In the evenings, Oliver and I sat wrapped in blankets on the porch, sipping hot cocoa, listening to the wind pass through the trees. One night, Oliver turned to me and asked out of the blue, "Mom, can I be a dad someday?" I smiled and nodded. "If you know how to love, how to protect, and how to say sorry when you're wrong, then you'll be a wonderful dad." I've lived so many years in reacting to abandonment, to favoritism, to the warped expectations of my old family. I once thought I was simply good at enduring, but now I understand. What matters is not what you've endured, but how you choose to live after it all. I choose to be intentional. Intentional in how I love, intentional in how I raise my son, intentional in deciding who gets to have a place in my life. I don't need a perfect world. I just need a space where Oliver and I can be ourselves, without fear, without control, without conditions. I started a small project, a blog about my journey as a single mother and how to set boundaries with toxic family members. I share what I've learned from therapy, from legal action, and from my own hard-earned experience. Unexpectedly, within just 3 months, the blog drew thousands of readers, mostly women. They told me stories that left me speechless. A sister forced to give up her inheritance to her brother, a mother thrown out of her home after divorce, a young woman branded ungrateful simply for living differently from her family's expectations. I no longer felt alone, and I knew my voice, my story, had value. I once thought my life ended at 27 when James passed away, but it turns out I had only just begun to live. Not to please anyone, not to prove anything, but to live true to myself. I may not have a large extended family, may not have boisterous holiday dinners, but I have Oliver, the child who looks at me with absolute trust. And every morning I wake up, see his smile, and make coffee in the sunlit kitchen of my own home. That is a kind of happiness no one can take away. Rebirth doesn't come from a single grand event. It comes from small choices, every day. And I have chosen to live, to love, to leave, to begin again. All of it is my choice. If one day my mother and Lisa happen to see this video, I don't know how they'll feel. Maybe they'll be angry. Maybe they'll smirk, thinking I'm making things up to play the victim. Or maybe they'll feel nothing at all, just as they once stayed silent before my tears for so many years. But whatever their reaction, I still want to make this clear, not to ask for their understanding, but to free my own heart. I have forgiven, but I have not forgotten. And I am not going back. I forgive, not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to keep living in the bitterness you left behind. I carried it for so long, until it began to define me. But today, I no longer let that past imprison me. I let it go, so I can hold my son with both arms, unburdened by anger or resentment. I don't blame my mother for loving Lisa more than me. I'm only sad that she never realized how deep a crack that left in me. I don't blame Lisa for being spoiled, but I regret that she grew up never learning gratitude. Both of you, whatever whether by accident or intent, taught me a costly lesson, that some families are not built on love, but on obligation, guilt, and control. And I have chosen not to live in that kind of family anymore. I once longed for my mother to call me a good daughter. Once hoped Lisa would hug me and say, "You've done so much for me, I know." But I don't need that anymore, because I've learned to say it to myself. I have been the best mother, sister, and friend I could be. And the miracle is, when I let go of expecting change from those who refuse it, I began to see others, people ready to love me the right way, without conditions. If my mother and Lisa still think I am cruel for cutting ties, for seeking a restraining order, for telling this story to the world, I accept that. I don't need to be understood. I only need to be free. And if there's one thing I want you to know, it's this. I am okay. I am strong. And I am living a life I chose with my own hands. Not because you allowed it, but because I deserve it. Do you think I acted too harshly? Or do you think I waited too long to speak up? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your story, your feelings, and the things you've kept silent in your own heart. And if this story has touched you in some way, don't forget to like, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to join me on more journeys of truth, healing, and choosing the right kind of love. Because sometimes all we need is to know that someone understands us. Thank you for listening. And if no one has told you this today, let me be the one to say it. You deserve to be loved. Truly, unconditionally.